California, September 16th, 2003. Riverside Sheriff's Department received reports of a body in a pickup truck just outside the city of Paris.
I heard the call go out, a dead body in a vehicle in the area of Markham and Indian Avenue.
There were at least 35 stab wounds on the victim. It was overkill, and usually overkill is a personal thing.
The victim is 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva, who was last seen leaving for work with his teenage nephew, Hugo.
Hugo and Thomas left for work about 3:30 in the morning. The truck broke down, and Thomas stayed at the truck.
Police begin to question onlookers who have gathered at the scene.
And I'm thinking, who found this guy? And it's like, well, the wife found him. I just thought it was kind of strange.
Further investigation throws up more questions for detectives as they uncover a secret love triangle involving the victim.
I guess love does crazy things to people, and you throw in sex and it really makes them do some crazy things.
Jealousy can go a long way to help people commit crimes, even murder.
The city of Paris in Riverside County, California, is located 70 miles east of Los Angeles.
When I first started, it was still an agricultural area, basically. It was a lot of wheat and barley and livestock out here. But now it's hugely grown. It's a lot of industry, a lot of homes.
In 2003, Paris had a very high crime rate. Back then, it was kind of a corridor for drug trafficking coming up from Mexico and then throughout the United States. It's improved quite a bit since then.
Riverside at the time was like the Wild West. It was away from the major cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, Orange County.
Predominantly Hispanic and Black at the time. As you go north into the county areas, then the white population is a little more dispersed.
On the morning of September 16th, 2003, officers from Riverside Sheriff's Department receive a 911 call. A body has been discovered on the outskirts of Paris.
They notified us around 8:30, 8:35. We got there maybe 20 minutes later.
I was actually driving into the office, and I got a call from the sergeant, said, hey, we have a homicide in the rural area of Paris. I need you to respond out there.
Officers arrive at the scene and find a crowd has already gathered.
I've been to a lot of homicides, and there was something different about this scene. When I got there, it was just a lot of people just close around where the body was. We need to get these people out of here.
It's an industrial complex. There's no real residences around there. It's all industrial buildings.
There was a red Dodge pickup truck parked behind the trees off the road, and that's where the body was located.
Directly across the street from it was a concrete manufacturing facility. Somebody from the concrete facility heard a woman screaming. Quite a few people from the concrete plant walked across the street, and they discovered that the victim was deceased in the truck.
Investigators move the crowd back and begin assessing the scene.
There would be a briefing once the homicide unit got there. All the facts that have been developed probably up to that point to give the homicide guys and girls something to go with, so they have an idea of what's going on.
And then from there, we got assignments. We had case agents and then a scene person.
I received a phone call from Riverside Sheriff Department. They were at the scene of a death and requested I respond.
You got to consider everything as evidence. You get pretty much one opportunity to go through and collect that evidence.
As we walked in and do our walkthrough, I saw a red truck on the side of the road. The door was open, and I saw a deceased male on the floor, covered in blood.
There was a body that looked like a Hispanic male with his head kind of at the passenger door area and his feet towards the driver's side or where the gas and foot pedals would be.
He was laying face down, knees up to his chest, on the floorboard of the vehicle.
There was a large amount of blood that was obviously visible, and it looked fresh, like it had just happened or fairly recently.
The victim is 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva.
We removed the clothing for protection so they could examine it closely later, and we did notice that there was considerable wounds on his back and front, face, neck, hands, torso. They located a knife and a cigarette lighter in the ground next to the driver's door of the truck.
We took our scene photographs and then we walked out of the scene, and then we said, okay, we need to start interviewing some people.
I assigned a deputy to take a digital camera and photograph every person that was anywhere near the crime scene. And then we also had them photograph the actual sole of their shoes because they had been walking around, so we could try to match shoe prints and shoe impressions from around the area of the truck.
Investigators quickly learn that some of the victim's close relatives are nearby.
Some of the family members, including the wife, were at the scene.
Since it was Spanish speaking, I was assigned to do the translation and do all the interviews in Spanish.
Our interviews, we always like to conduct them in a formal setting. And eventually they always do get to a formal setting, but it might be something as simple initially as a field interview, just to get some information.
Officers now learn that it was Tomas's wife, Maria Della Riva, and her sister, Sylvia Reyes, who discovered Tomas's truck that morning and made the 911 call.
And I asked Maria, what happened to your husband? And she said, well, you know, he left and didn't come back, and I don't know what happened to him. Then, you know, I went looking for him, and I found him.
Around 6 a.m., she and her sister, Sylvia, left for work, and she tells her sister that Thomas's truck had broken down when he left for work earlier that morning, and that she was concerned something had happened to him. They decided to go looking for him. Sometime between 7 and 8 a.m. that day, they find his truck, and they find Mr. Della Riva on his stomach on the floor of the truck. He had been stabbed 33 times.
It was the wife that was the one that was screaming that got the attention of the people from the concrete factory next door.
Detectives invite Maria and Sylvia back to the station for a formal interview, hoping to understand more about Thomas and his last known movements.
After her initial interview, I actually transported the wife of the victim back to our station, and she was interviewed by Detective Masson.
I said, are you involved in any way in the demise of your husband? And no, you know, and oh, okay. He went to work with Hugo, my nephew, through marriage. My husband usually takes him to work.
Tomas Della Riva's nephew Hugo traveled from Mexico to the United States 1 year earlier and was living with Thomas, his wife Maria, and their children.
Hugo eventually showed back up at the house, but without the victim. Hugo stated that the truck broke down and that his uncle was left there with the truck, and Hugo walked back to the house.
A short time later, Hugo returns home and informs Tomas's wife, Maria Della Riva, that their truck broke down and he needs water to fix it.
He came back, he said the car overheated, got 3 bottles of water, and he left. And then from there, he called and said, hey, you know, I can't find him. Uncle Tomas is not there anymore, and he probably went to another family member's house, but I have to go to work. So he went off to a relative named Aaron, who took him to Orange County to work.
Hugo's boss is Maria Della Riva's brother, Aaron Reyes.
We knew that Hugo was the last person to see the victim alive.
Aaron and Hugo are together, and I said, well, they need to come back. We need to talk to them.
So we called Hugo's boss in Orange County and asked if Hugo would be willing to come back and meet with us.
Aaron drives Hugo back from Orange County to the police station in Perris.
I talked to Aaron before I talked to Hugo. And he's like, I brought him back, and he's waiting for you guys. We need to find out exactly what's going on here.
Officers hope that Hugo can assist them with their investigation.
I bring Hugo into the interview room and I ask him, what happened? And he goes, well, I woke up early. My uncle always takes me over to Aaron's house to drive off to work. And then what happened to that? He goes, well, we were driving to Aaron's house. The car overheated. Where did it overheat at? It overheated at Wilson. Would you be able to take us to there? Show us where, oh, sure, I'll take you guys. So at that time, we get in the car with Hugo, and he takes us down to the location. And he said, well, this is where the car overheated. There was some scuff marks where the tires like that. So that's all consistent with what he told us. And where do you think your uncle went after that? I don't know. What'd you do? He goes, well, I went home to get some water, okay? And did you see anyone? Well, I saw my nephew, Esteban, who eventually ended up giving me a ride back to Aaron's house to take me to work because we couldn't find my uncle. I said, okay. So we take him back to the station. We put him in the interview room now.
Hugo's uncle Aaron now reveals some important information to investigators.
Aaron comes up to me and says, hey, I just want to let you know, when we told him that his body was found, there was no reaction. There's something going on here. I'm like, okay. And he goes, also, I just want to let you know that Hugo and Maria were having some type of sexual relationship.
They were having an affair right underneath his uncle's eyes, and he was aware of the affair. It was no secret.
This startling new piece of information about Hugo's affair with his aunt Maria gives police their first serious lead in their investigation into the brutal murder of Thomas Della Riva. September 16th, 2003, Riverside County, California. The bloodied body of construction worker Thomas Della Riva is discovered in his red pickup truck on the outskirts of the city of Perris. Thomas left his home earlier that morning to go to work with his nephew Hugo Della Riva, who was living with Thomas and his family at the time. Detectives have discovered Hugo has been having an affair with his aunt Maria.
We found out that there was a secretive relationship that was going on the side behind the victim's back.
Talked to Hugo. I have no idea what happened to my uncle. Last time I saw him, he was alive, was waiting for me. He probably went to a relative's house. Well, what relative do you have around there? Well, I don't know. Maybe it was one of his relatives. Well, wouldn't one of his relatives be one of your relatives? Now he's getting a little frustrated. The answers he's giving me is not matching. He still sticks with the story. I have no idea.
The interview with Hugo is suddenly interrupted by an unexpected development.
After the initial interview with Maria, Detective Masson asked for somebody to sit in the room with her. While that officer was sitting in the room with her, she began to make some spontaneous statements. And so the officer came to me and I notified Detective Masson.
Maria wants to talk to you. She's saying that he came back and he raped her in a room.
Maria's serious accusation against Hugo changes the attitude of the investigators.
Like, sit down with Maria and tell me exactly what happened when he came home. Well, he came home, I was in my room, and he came in, he was completely naked. Did he have any blood on him or anything? Well, he was washing his clothes. How about his boots? And she said, well, he washed his boots outside.
But inconsistencies in Maria's story begin to raise doubts in the minds of the investigators.
She's all over the place. Her story just doesn't match. She's telling me details where the boots are. She's probably there watching them. There's something going on. I asked her, do you think Hugo had something to do with the demise of your husband? And she says, I think he did. I said, well, why would you? Well, we've been having a sexual relationship for a long time. I said, I'm going to take you back, have you sit with your family. Please don't discuss anything with anyone.
Her story didn't appear to match kind of what was going on with the whole totality of the evidence that we had there, and things were just a little bit off.
From there, I go back into the interview room with Hugo. And I say, I think we have a little issue here. Have you been having a relationship with your aunt? And he kind of looks at me and says, well, yeah, we have. Why didn't you tell me that before? And he's like, well, I didn't think it was important. He starts kind of backpedaling a little bit. And I'm like, well, it is important. Honestly, I don't think what happened this morning is what you're telling me.
The tone of questioning now takes a dramatic turn in an attempt by investigators to find out what happened in the hours and days prior to the fatal attack on Thomas.
I'm letting him tell me a story because some of the story's true that he's telling me. Other parts, it's not. But, it's his story.
You want to kind of make him at ease, and then at some point you are going to transition into a serious interrogation and at some point get accusatory and try to elicit information with the facts that you've developed up to that point.
Eventually, I start breaking him down where I had to read him his Miranda rights. He waived his rights and wanted to talk to me.
Hugo tells investigators about the abusive and violent relationship between his uncle and aunt and how it sparked the idea of murdering Thomas.
He came up with the story that, yes, they were having a sexual relationship. He hated his uncle because he would beat the kids and would beat Maria. He just didn't like that. And him and Maria got really close, and that's how they started the relationship. And, Maria wanted me to kill him.
There had been this plan or this scheme to murder her husband so that they could be together.
She'd get an argument with her husband, Tomas, and then she'd come back and tell him, let's kill him. And then, of course, Hugh would get all excited. They would have sex. And after sex, she would say, something, why don't we just hold off on that for another day? The cycle would start again. And this goes on for a long time.
Enraged by a feeling of helplessness, Hugo now makes a fateful decision that will change everyone's lives.
Hugo finally gets to the point where he's like, I'm just going to kill him. And she's like, well, if you're going to kill him, you do it. Keep me out of it. Don't get me involved. Well, I think it's a little too late for that.
Hugo explains to investigators the planning that went into killing his uncle.
Hugo told investigators that he had asked to borrow $1,500 from Maria and that Thomas wouldn't notice that the money was gone and that she gave him the money and that he used this money to pay a guy named Armando to kill Thomas.
Even in today's world, the hiring of a hitman is very rare. And $1,500, even in 2003 money, that's pretty cheap.
He describes Armando. He says Armando's the one who stabbed him. He's the one that did everything, not me. I was there.
Hugo's in the front seat, and this Armando guy is in the back seat behind Thomas, who was driving. While they're driving, they stop on Wilson. Armando wraps a cord around Thomas's neck and strangles him and starts stabbing him.
Well, what's your uncle doing? My uncle's screaming out, Hugo, help me, Hugo, help me. Car comes to a stop. I get out of the truck, and I go around, but it's too late. My uncle's dead. And what do? Well, I just go home. He's describing how his uncle's being stabbed consisted of him stabbing his uncle.
Then Hugo tells the investigator, after he leaves and walks back home, Armando drives off in the vehicle with the victim.
Hugo's startling account of Thomas's murder stuns investigators, but more unexpected revelations quickly follow.
By that time, I'm getting pagers. I come out of the room. So I come out of the room, and they're like, hey, go talk to Maria again. She wants to tell you some more.
Suspicion now falls on Maria de la Riva and her role in the murder of her husband, Thomas.
I need to put Maria in an interview room because she's a suspect now. So I get her in an interview room, and I said, Maria, I need to read your rights. She waives her rights, and she tells me a story about, yeah, we've been in a relationship, but I do love my husband. We have kids together and the whole thing, but we just don't have a good relationship. And I confide in Hugo, and that's how our relationship started. So she tells me everything, the thing leading up to that morning.
Maria now gives a different version of events of what happened earlier that morning.
I woke him up to go to work, and the last thing I told Hugo was, don't do nothing to him. I don't want to get involved. She's minimizing a little bit, not probably telling us the truth because she knew what was going on. She sends him off to work. She goes back to bed. knowing that her husband's going to get killed.
A short while later, Hugo returns to the house and wakes Maria.
He comes back, he's naked, and he jumps on top of me and takes my clothes off. What are you wearing? So, well, I'm wearing my shorts. What happened after that? He just got up and called Esteban to take him over to Aaron's house.
Maria's clothing also raises the suspicions of the officers.
She's in a sweatsuit. I asked Maria, where's your shorts? You told me you were in shorts this morning. Well, I took them off after we made love. There's a big difference between sex and love.
More information about the troubled family dynamic emerges from an unlikely source. Maria's sister Sylvia now asks to speak to investigators.
I said, Sylvia, I was told that you want to talk to me. She goes, yeah, I think my sister and Hugo were involved in the death of her husband. I'm like, okay, well, what makes you think that? She goes, they've been having an affair for a long time. I said, well, how do you know? She said, well, Maria told me. How about Tomas? Does he know? She goes, well, I was at a quinceañera, which is a Sweet 15 type party, and I confided to Tomas, and I said, hey, just to let you know, Hugo and Maria are having a sexual relationship. And Tomas says, I know. I know they've been having it, and I told him to break it off, but I'm afraid if they leave, the kids are going to leave, she's going to leave, and, I'm left here by myself. So I just kind of left it alone.
Investigators are getting closer to finding out what really happened earlier that morning to Thomas Della Riva, but many questions remain unanswered.
Once they told me the whole story, I went back to Hugo and I said, okay, Hugo, we got some serious problems here. I don't think there's Armando. I think you're the one who probably stabbed your uncle to death. So he kind of breaks down a little bit. I hate him. He beat the kids, he beat her, and, but it wasn't me. I was there, it wasn't me.
Hugo now accuses Maria of paying for the murder of her husband, Thomas Della Riva.
She gave me $1,500, and we were planning to use that money to give to Armando to kill my uncle. Well, where's the money at? Well, my car got towed, it got impounded because I didn't have a license. I'm like, okay, you're telling me all this stuff, but did you give the money to Armando? I said, well, I approached Armando a long time ago, and he said, yes, I'll kill him, but it'll cost you $1,500. So I was giving him $50 here, $25 here, and I'm thinking, buddy, that doesn't make sense. Are we gonna find Armando? Well, yes, you are.
Investigators must now find Armando and establish his role in the murder of Thomas Della Riva. Perris, Riverside County, California. 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva has been found murdered in his pickup truck by the side of the road. Detectives have uncovered an affair between his wife Maria and his teenage nephew Hugo. Hugo has admitted to planning his uncle's murder with a man called Armando.
Homicide detectives transported Hugo to a location where Hugo identified where Armando lived. We arrived out at that scene. One of the deputy district attorneys went with us. We froze the residence in anticipation of getting a warrant for it.
We talked to the roommate that lived in the trailer with him. Oh, he left a couple days. I haven't seen him in a couple days, so that's kind of strange. I'm thinking, wait a minute.
We actually asked all the people that were at the house whether they'd be willing to come back to the Perris station to be interviewed, which they did. Armando was not identified as a suspect in this case.
Armando could have been just another person. He probably just threw the name out there.
With Armando now firmly ruled out as a suspect, investigators choose an unusual tactic to try and unravel the web of lies being spun by Hugo and Maria.
I go back to Hugo, and I say, you're pointing a finger at her, she's pointing a finger at you. You probably need to talk to Maria. You probably need to kind of set this straight. I went to Maria and I said, Hugo wants to talk to you. You okay with that? She goes, yeah, I want to talk to him. I'm fine with that.
Maybe something's just not clicking. We'll put those two people together in a room, and they'll start talking, whispering, and that's being monitored.
I brought Hugo in and I said, Maria's sitting there. Hugo, I want you to sit over here. I don't want you guys walking towards each other. Please talk, but there's no touching.
And you're watching for just little things that are suspicious, and you use that information against them.
They start talking to each other. He tells Maria, why did you say everything? I was going to take the blame for it. And Maria's like, well, I told you not to do it. You know, I told you not to get me involved. I told you not to do it. And they're talking details about the murder. Hugo, a couple of times, got up and started walking towards her. Of course, I'm sitting there watching it. So I go in there and I kind of make it look like I'm not watching, you know, because they don't know we're watching. Knock on the door. I go in. And I'm like, I told you guys, I don't want you doing that. Getting close. I need you to sit here. I need you to sit over there. That's it. So I break them up and they start talking again. Hugo ended up wanting a hug from her, and obviously she didn't want nothing to do with him. That got close to the point we were able to break it up and put them back in their corners so they could talk again. And that went to the point where, okay, we got enough.
Investigators now believe they have enough evidence to arrest Hugo and Maria for the murder of Thomas Della Riva.
We told them, you're under arrest for the homicide of your husband, the homicide of your uncle.
You still have to corroborate that. You have to take your bits and pieces of evidence that you've developed, and you finally get to a point, it may not all be done, but you can see the picture, and you just take it from there.
I booked them into Robert Presley Detention Center, which is downtown Riverside. From there, they could have been moved anywhere within Riverside County.
With Hugo and Maria now in custody, investigators must gather all the evidence available to them to build the strongest possible case.
In Riverside County, when we have a homicide, we have a team of 5 people. You have a lead investigator, a case agent, you have someone who's going to process the scene, and then you have 2 extra investigators that will canvass or help process the scene also.
We had gone to Winchester for the original Armando search warrant. Then we also went to an address on Hennessy in the city of Paris, which is where Maria and the victim lived. Froze the location in anticipation of a search warrant.
I authored the search warrant. We went later on that day and processed the house with one of our forensic technicians.
Investigators conduct a detailed crime scene investigation of Thomas and Maria Della Riva's home to gather crucial evidence in the case.
I want to search Hugo's room. I want to search the room where apparently the rape occurred. I collected the shorts, the clothing in the washer, the boots that did have blood on them.
Another piece of evidence provides investigators with an insight into Hugo's mental state prior to the killing of his uncle.
Hugo had a drawing sketch of Maria on cardboard in his room.
Clearly, there was a lot of emotion, passion involved. She could have just said, hey, you're my nephew. I don't want nothing to do with you. Let's just break this off. This is not appropriate.
I think she played a critical role in it. Had it not been for her and her affair, the victim would probably be alive today.
Riverside County Coroner's Office now conducts a detailed autopsy of Thomas Della Riva's body as part of the investigation into his murder.
The deputy coroner, when he runs into a death of this nature, he carries that with him through other deaths and other situations. It both steadies himself and it gives him experience that say, hey, I saw this before. This happened in this case, and it matches exactly this case. We bring the body in, and the body's unclothed, photographed, washed front and back. If we need to, we do x-rays, provide those to the doctor doing the examination. Some start with the head, some start with the hands, but they examine everything.
The autopsy reveals the brutal injuries sustained by Thomas in the final moments of his life.
Generally, a report is maybe 1 or 2 pages. I think in this case, he wrote like 10 pages. There are several defensive marks on his hands where he tried to protect himself. Injuries to his back, injuries to his head, injuries to his face. At one point, there's a pressure put on his neck, and we saw those by petechia in his eye, which is a hemorrhage in his eyes from that particular movement.
The high number of stab wounds found on Thomas's body indicates a personal connection between him and his killer.
Whenever you have knives and cutting edges, it becomes very personal.
An angry person wants them to be hurt, and this is what he was doing. A killer would just hit you once in the heart and you're dead, but that's something that's personal.
To be able to conjure up the ability or the courage to actually strangle somebody and watch the life just kind of slowly slip away from them, that's pretty personable.
Detective Masson identified Hugo and Maria as the suspects in this case.
Hugo and Maria Della Riva are now formally charged with the murder of Thomas Della Riva.
Both of them were charged with 187 of California Penal Code, which is murder.
September 2003. Maria Della Riva and her nephew Hugo Della Riva have been charged with the murder of Maria's husband, Thomas.
Maria initially denied knowing anything about how her husband was killed and why and who did it. But later she recanted and admitted that she had been having an affair with Hugo and that he had told her he wanted to kill Thomas.
She went along with him. She, at times, would approach him and say, I want you to kill him. She would turn him on, turn him off, turn him off, turn him on, to the point where Hugo said, hey, you know something? I just need to take care of this and do away with him.
He wanted Maria for himself. Probably didn't like the fact that husband and wife were still living and sleeping together.
Under police questioning, Hugo accuses his friend Armando of killing his uncle Thomas.
Hugo tells the investigator that he and Thomas and this Armando guy get in the truck. And as they're driving, Hugo's in the front seat, Thomas is driving. This Armando guy is supposedly sitting in the rear seat behind the driver, behind Thomas. As they come to a stop on Wilson, Armando, according to Hugo, wraps a cord around Thomas's neck and strangles him and then starts stabbing him.
Hugo and Maria are both charged with the murder of Thomas Della Riva. They are detained and booked into the county jail while awaiting trial.
I did go see him one other time in the jail. We showed him a picture of Armando. We ended up identifying him. Is this him? He said, yeah, that's him. Okay, at least we have an identification of the guy.
But investigators quickly rule out this false lead and focus in on the real killers.
Armando was not ever a suspect.
To this day, I don't even know if they even found that guy. I don't even know if he was involved in that.
This inter-family crime of passion shocks a community familiar with violence and murder.
That relationship was going on for a long time. A lot of the family members knew that was going on. From what the family members told me during the investigation, Tomas knew that his wife was having a sexual relationship with the nephew.
But nobody could have predicted the shocking and deadly events this bizarre love affair would ultimately lead to.
People might think about doing certain things, but they don't carry through. And then there are those people that they think about it, they plan it, and then they carry through. They're willing to step over the edge. That's always a pretty crazy thing. How does one get to that level?
Family members knew the relationship was going on, but they didn't think it was going to go to that level of killing a family member.
The human heart can be a dangerous thing. You just never know in situations like this what can happen. Certainly the victim didn't know. And it does beg questions. Why would you continue associating with your nephew who's having an affair with your wife? You know about this.
Love is very strong, and he felt very strong about his wife and keeping the family together. At one time, Maria and Tomas probably did love each other, They had a good family, but over time, that deteriorated to the point where she relied on Hugo to comfort her, and that's how the relationship started.
Investigators continue building their case against Hugo and Maria de la Riva.
And there's no doubt that Hugo was the guy who did the stabbing. Maria was not the actual person physically doing it, but this whole thing happened because of her relationship. She's the focal point.
Anytime you get a confession, it's good. I always liked not just having a confession, but have them reenact it. Tomas did reenact what happened in that cab of that truck. So I had a confession and I had a reenactment from him. Maria just confessed, and that was it.
She knew of the plan, and she was a part of that plan it, and helped try to cover it up initially till all this evidence against him was exposed. There was really no more defending that they could do to protect themselves.
The district attorney makes the decision to hold a joint trial for Hugo and Maria.
Typical courtroom, you had one side of the family on one side, and then the other side you have the responding officers, myself, the interview, the forensic techs, the deputy coroner that went out there, a handful of witnesses, a couple family members that supports Hugo and Maria, and they keep them separated.
Prosecutors must establish a high degree of planning on the part of Hugo to ensure he faces the full force of the law.
Was the case premeditated? Clearly it was. Obviously, Hugo knew he was going to be getting his ride to work and had to pick a date and a time and a location where he ultimately committed the crime, and so that took a little bit of planning and preparation. Certainly did not appear to be anything that was spontaneous.
I don't think there were any signs or information where he was mistreated by his uncle or anything. When one is willing to murder a close family member that's always been good to you, I think that takes it to a whole different level.
The prosecution must also present a convincing case to the jury about Maria's involvement in the brutal murder of her husband, Tomas.
There were red flags from the very beginning. You just don't get that many homicides where the husband leaves to go to work and then somehow the wife shows up at the scene to discover this truck at a fairly remote location. How does she wind up there?
There's like an old saying that suspect returning to the crime scene, which happens frequently, and it's done in the hopes of maybe throwing off the investigation that, why would I show back up where my deceased husband's at? And this was one of those cases.
As the police, right, we have a threshold that we have to meet, which is the probable cause threshold to make these arrests. Obviously, the prosecution has a separate set that they need to evaluate the case with. Giving that much evidence that, hey, what have you told the police? What did you tell them? I think it kind of displays the level of guilt, right, and their participation in this crime.
The jury retires to deliberate the verdict in the case. They return to court and find both defendants guilty on all counts of the charges against them.
From the time the investigators picked up the case, the evidence led them right to the two suspects. They were both tried and convicted. It's about as strong a case of justice being served as we can expect under the circumstances and looking at the facts of the case.
When these cases are put together, they go to the district attorney and their chiefs. They have what's called a staffing, and they sit down and they discuss what is it that we can prove. Can we do the death penalty? Clearly, it was a first-degree murder, right? He could have been eligible for the death penalty.
Hugo de la Riva was sentenced to life without parole. Maria de la Riva was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Maria just got 25 years to life. 25 years later, she would be eligible for parole.
For the de la Riva family, the pain and sadness of their loss will never heal.
It's sad. Family is left behind, children are left behind. without a father, without a mother, knowing what happened, that, mother was having a sexual relationship with a nephew, and the nephew ended up killing dad. The kids are old enough now that they probably know what happened. They were old enough then.
It's very odd to have a nephew having an affair with a married woman and then ultimately killing the husband.
But many questions remain for those left behind. And could a crime like this have been avoided?
He wanted her, and it came down to jealousy that I want Maria. I had to get rid of my uncle to be with Maria.
They wanted something, and they were so desperate for it that they were willing to commit a murder to be together.
How he would think that would happen, how he would think in his mind that this is going to work out, that, his uncle's going to be out of the picture and he's just going to take the place of his uncle with her. That's for him to tell you.
The thorough investigation by the homicide team ensures justice is served in this case.
It's just being tenacious about your investigation to really dig into the stories that they're giving you, and does it make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, then okay, we'll figure out why. Whether that's follow-up interviews, whether that's matching the evidence that's at the scene to what they're telling you.
The thing that stands out most are the number and severity of the injuries. It was a crime of passion, basically. That was their ace card. There's more to it than this, yeah.
To me, it was just kind of like, I'm just doing my job. I want to get as much as possible in there, because at the end of the day, I don't want something to say, well, we didn't do this, or this wasn't done, or we didn't get enough evidence on her. She was a victim of this, and obviously she was not.
I'm sure that his family is appreciative that the people responsible for this are spending time in prison.
For countless ways, I think about you, baby. I think about the big ocean. Where do the waves come from? Waves start from the wind. Where does the wind start? I don't know either. When do we love each other? Waves in the depths, waves on the water. All the waves miss the shore. Can't sleep day and night. My heart misses you. Even in dreams, it's still away. Even if it goes to the north. Even though it's back to the south. Everywhere I think, turning towards him in one direction. Out there in the ocean, hundreds of thousands of waves, none of them reach the shore. Despite all the obstacles, life is so long. Years still pass like the ocean, even though it is wide. Clouds still fly far away. How to dissolve into hundreds of small waves in the middle of a great sea of love. Let it still flat for thousands of years.
Hugo finally gets to the point where he's like, I'm just going to kill him. And she's like, well, if you're going to kill him, you do it. Keep me out of it. Don't get me involved. Well, I think it's a little too late for that.
Hugo explains to investigators the planning that went into killing his uncle.
Hugo told investigators that he had asked to borrow $1,500 from Maria, and that Thomas wouldn't notice that the money was gone, and that she gave him the money, and that he used this money to pay a guy named Armando to kill Thomas.
Even in today's world, the hiring of a hitman is very rare. And $1,500, even in 2003 money, that's pretty cheap.
He describes Armando. He says Armando's the one who stabbed him. He's the one that did everything, not me. I was there.
Hugo's in the front seat, and this Armando guy is in the back seat behind Thomas, who was driving. While they're driving, they stop on Wilson. Armando wraps a cord around Thomas's neck and strangles him and starts stabbing him.
Well, what's your uncle doing? My uncle's screaming out, Hugo, help me, Hugo, help me. Car comes to a stop. I get out of the truck, and I go around, but it's too late. My uncle's dead. And what do? Well, I just go home. He's describing how his uncle's being stabbed consisted of him stabbing his uncle.
Then Hugo tells the investigator, after he leaves and walks back home, Armando drives off in the vehicle with the victim.
Hugo's startling account of Tomas's murder stuns investigators, but more unexpected revelations quickly follow.
By that time, I'm getting pagers. I come out of the room. So I come out of the room, and they're like, hey, go talk to Maria again. She wants to tell you some more.
Suspicion now falls on Maria Della Riva and her role in the murder of her husband, Thomas.
I need to put Maria in an interview room because she's a suspect now. So I get her in an interview room, and I said, Maria, I need to read your rights. She waives her rights, and she tells me a story about, yeah, we've been in a relationship, but
I think about
love. There's a big difference between sex and love.
More information about the troubled family dynamic emerges from an unlikely source. Maria's sister Sylvia now asks to speak to investigators.
I said, Sylvia, I was told that you want to talk to me. She goes, yeah, I think my sister and Hugo were involved in the death of her husband. I'm like, okay, well, what makes you think that? She goes, they've been having an affair for a long time. I said, well, how do you know? She said, well, Maria told me. How about Tomas? Does he know? She goes, well, I was at a quinceañera, which is a Sweet 15 type party, and I confided to Tomas, and I said, hey, just to let you know, Hugo and Maria are having a sexual relationship. And Tomas says, I know. I know they've been having it, and I told him to break it off, but I'm afraid if they leave, the kids are going to leave, she's going to leave, and, you know, I'm left here by myself. So I just kind of left it alone.
Investigators are getting closer to finding out what really happened earlier that morning to Thomas Della Riva, but many questions remain unanswered.
Once they told me the whole story, I went back to Hugo and I said, okay, Hugo, we got some serious problems here. I don't think there's Armando. I think you're the one who probably stabbed your uncle to death. So he kind of breaks down a little bit. I hate him. You know, he beat the kids, he beat her, and, you know, but it wasn't me. I was there. It wasn't me.
Hugo now accuses Maria of paying for the murder of her husband, Thomas Della Riva.
She gave me $1,500, and we were planning to use that money to give to Armando to kill my uncle. Well, where's the money at? Well, my car got towed. It got impounded because I didn't have a license. I'm like, okay, you're telling me all this stuff, but did you give the money to Armando? I said, well, I approached Armando a long time ago, and he said, yes, I'll kill him, but it'll cost you $1,500. So I was giving him $50 here, $25 here, and I'm thinking, buddy, that doesn't make sense. Are we going to find Armando? Well, yes, you are.
Investigators must now find Armando and establish his role in the murder of Thomas Della Riva. Perris, Riverside County, California. 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva has been found murdered in his pickup truck by the side of the road. Detectives have uncovered an affair between his wife Maria and his teenage nephew Hugo. Hugo has admitted to planning his uncle's murder with a man called Armando.
Homicide detectives transported Hugo to a location.
Intense and mellow, noisy and quiet. The river doesn't understand me. Waves find their way to the ocean. All the waves of the past. And the next day it was still the same. The desire for love. Recovery in the child's chest.
Armando was not identified as a suspect in this case.
Armando could have been just another person. He probably just threw the name out there.
With Armando now firmly ruled out as a suspect, investigators choose an unusual tactic to try and unravel the web of lies being spun by Hugo and Maria.
I go back to Hugo and I say, you're pointing a finger at her, she's pointing a finger at you. You probably need to talk to Maria. You probably need to kind of set this straight. I went to Maria and I said, Hugo wants to talk to you. You okay with that? She goes, yeah, I want to talk to him. I'm fine with that.
Maybe something's just not clicking. We'll put those two people together in a room and they'll start talking, whispering, and that's being monitored.
I brought Hugo in and I said, Maria's sitting there. Hugo, I want you to sit over here. I don't want you guys walking towards each other. Please talk, but there's no touching.
And you're watching for just little things that are suspicious, and you use that information against them.
They start talking to each other. He tells Maria, why did you say everything? I was going to take the blame for it. And Maria's like, well, I told you not to do it. You know, I told you not to get me involved. I told you not to do it. And they're talking details about the murder. Hugo, a couple times, got up and started walking towards her. Of course, I'm sitting there watching it. So I go in there and I kind of make it look like I'm not watching, you know, because they don't know we're watching. Knock on the door. I go in. And I'm like, I told you guys, I don't want you doing that. Getting close. I need you to sit here. I need you to sit over there. That's it. So I break them up and they start talking again. Hugo ended up wanting a hug from her, and obviously she didn't want nothing to do with him. That got close to the point we were able to break it up and put them back in their corners so they could talk again. And that went to the point where, okay, we got enough.
Investigators now believe they have enough evidence to arrest Hugo and Maria for the murder of Thomas Della Riva.
We told them, you're under arrest for the homicide of your husband, the homicide of your uncle.
You still have to corroborate that. You have to take your bits and pieces of evidence that you've developed, and you finally get to a point, it may not all be done, but you can see the picture, and you just take it from there.
I booked them into Robert Presley Detention Center, which is downtown Riverside. From there, they could have been moved anywhere within Riverside County.
With Hugo and Maria now in custody, investigators must gather all the evidence available to them to build the strongest possible case.
In Riverside County, when we have a homicide, we have a team of 5 people. You have a lead investigator, a case agent, you have someone who's going to process the scene, and then you have 2 extra investigators that will canvass or help process the scene also.
We had gone to Winchester for the original Armando search warrant. Then we also went to an address on Hennessy in the city of Perris, which is where Maria and the victim lived. Froze the location in anticipation of a search warrant.
I authored the search warrant. We went later on that day and processed the house with one of our forensic technicians.
Investigators conduct a detailed crime.
It just sounds like something bad is happening there.
We know what happened because the video tells us what happened.
I heard some gunshots.
Drop it! Whatever it is, drop it!
That does not prove that I killed my wife.
The camera doesn't lie.
In the UK, in the northeast, in Yorkshire, the city of Hull.
Hull is, like many northern cities, had a very significant industry and industrial past. It also has a significant student population.
21-year-old Libby Squire was studying philosophy at Hull University.
Libby was an amazing daughter. She was incredibly funny. She had a wonderful sense of humour. She was very caring. Her and I were particularly close.
Affectionately nicknamed Libby Pie by her mom, Libby was born on New Year's Day, 1998.
I'd always wanted children. My husband and I had been together for 8 years when we had Libby. She was a really, really beautiful baby. I was a nanny when I had Libby, and she came back to work with me when she was 3 weeks old. I was very fortunate that I was able to spend every day with her.
Libby was the eldest of Lisa and her husband Russell's 4 children.
She was an amazing big sister. She made sure that they knew that she was number one. She adored them, and I think in turn they all adored her.
When she started school in her hometown of West Wickham in Buckinghamshire, Libby flourished.
Within the first week, she'd made, a whole class full of friends. She loved to read. She could read before she started school. Academically, she did really well and really took to it.
But when she reached her teens, Libby began to struggle with anxiety and depression.
I noticed her mental health was really declining, that she was self-harming daily, hourly at one point. It was horrendous. And sadly, she had 4 suicide attempts in her lifetime as well. It was really hard as a mum because I couldn't take that pain away from her. But it made her resilient.
Recent research from England has actually found that about 1 in 4, so a quarter of people between the ages of 11 and 16 who have mental health issues attempt to kill themselves or they engage in self-harming behaviors. So the rates are really very high. Since about 2000, there has been an increase in suicide, generally in places like the US and the UK. But exactly what's driving that increase in numbers is a bit unclear. Some people point to social media. Some people point to increased rates of anxiety and depression, especially in teenagers. Libby was determined to turn her life around and took a year off to deal with her mental health problems before going to university.
She spent lots of time working on herself. She worked so hard. She spent time with her boyfriend and spent lots of time with the family.
Libby started at the University of Hull in September 2017.
She was studying philosophy and she was good at it. She really enjoyed it because she'd found something that improved her mental health. She found her place, actually. And it was lovely watching her blossom into this beautiful woman.
Thursday, January 31st, 2019. Libby and her university friends went to the Welly nightclub in the student area of Hull.
It was 1 in the morning, so early hours of Friday morning. And I noticed a missed call from one of Libby's friends. She said, "We can't find Libby." And I said to her, "What do you mean you can't find Libby?" And then she just went on to say, we went to a nightclub and Libby wouldn't let Libby in because they said she was too drunk, so we put her in a taxi to send her home.
But when Libby's friends returned to their shared house, Libby was nowhere to be seen.
I just had this voice in my head saying, this is really serious. Because Libby would always call me if she was in trouble. We spoke 3 or 4 times a day. It was the strangest of feelings. I just was, oh my goodness, and I couldn't feel her. I couldn't connect with her in any way, shape or form.
In the early hours of Friday, February 1st, Libby was reported missing to the police.
How can I help? Right, so my friend, he put her in taxi to get home, and then now she's gone missing. Right, what's your friend's name? Libby.
From a police perspective, a young woman missing after a night out in a student area is going to be a high priority. It was particularly bad weather. It was very, very cold outside. And so immediately the police swung into action in terms of trying to locate her.
Libby's mom and dad drove up to Hull as soon as they could.
It was awful. And the whole time I was just thinking, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? It was the worst journey ever. It took us 5.5 hours to get up there. The windscreen wipers kept freezing and I just wanted to be there. He just wanted to go and find her.
When somebody is reported missing, they will speak to all of the people who were last in contact with that person, but they'll also start a search of closed-circuit television.
Police obtained CCTV footage from outside the Welly nightclub. It confirmed Libby arrived at 11:14 p.m. on Thursday, January 31st.
Here is Libby in the dark clothing with the bare legs, walking towards the entrance of the Welly club. We know this is Libby, so when we're seeing later footage, we're able to reference it across.
A mile away from the Welly nightclub, police obtained surveillance footage from a camera near Libby's home on Wellesley Avenue. It showed a taxi arriving at 11:29 p.m.
The police were able to identify the taxi driver and speak to him very rapidly. He gave an account of dropping Libby off and that he'd then left the area. There was no question that the taxi driver had in any way been involved in Libby's disappearance.
Libby's keys were later found right outside her front door.
We knew that the taxi driver had dropped her off, and we knew she hadn't gone into a house, but we then didn't know what had happened.
As the police continued searching through the footage, they saw Libby emerge from Wellesley Avenue at 11:36 p.m.
We've got the same clothing. With no doubt that's her. She was walking in an unsteady manner. She didn't appear to have any purpose. She was going up and down the road. She'd linger in one area, then move on slightly, and then go back and retrace her steps.
Libby was at risk of hypothermia and extremely vulnerable. Police needed to find her. As they continued searching through hours of surveillance footage, they uncovered a disturbing figure.
Libby was waiting in the area of a bus stop on Beverley Road. This is looking down Beverley Road. The CCTV picked up a figure of a man who appeared to notice Libby, and he's crossing the road, and he goes down this side street. He hasn't gone away, he's just watching her. He's seeing what sort of conditions she's in. She's still here by the bus stop, and now she starts to move back in the direction of her home. We can see she's not moving very quickly, she's quite unsteady still on her feet. But watch what he does. He sticks to the line of the buildings and walks up this side of the road, sort of tracking her movement. She's gone off, away from safety. He crosses the road and he follows her. In a moment, this green arrow is going to disappear. That's when Libby steps off the road into the grounds of a convent. Almost immediately, the suspect follows her. He's watched her, stalked her along the road, and now he's moving in. We now knew that Libby had come into contact with a man, and so it was absolutely crucial that we identified that man and could speak to him, because we didn't know what had then happened.
Libby's parents appealed to the public for information.
Libby, my darling pie, we just want to know that you're safe. Please get in touch with us any way you can. The whole family is missing you.
The police organized the largest missing person search in the history of Humberside Police. The whole community came out in full force.
Please come home, we know, we love you, and all the support, there's over 200 people in there for you, please come home soon.
The amount of people that were trying to find her, the whole place just were really focused on trying to get a good outcome for us. That really carried Ross and I along, and we were really grateful for all of the outpouring of love for her. I don't think there is a word to describe that situation that we were in. It was a feeling that I've never, ever, ever had before, obviously, and I would never, ever want anyone to go through that.
In the 18 months before Libby went missing, there was a series of disturbing incidents in the student area of Hull.
Please, what's the emergency? My housemate has caught a man looking in. Please, what's the emergency? I think there's a peeping Tom outside my house.
People who engage in voyeurism and who engage in flashing behaviors are repeat offenders. So it's very rare to have someone who just does it once and then never does it again. And whenever you have a repetition of bad behavior, of an antisocial behavior, you have generally a higher risk of also escalation of all these other negative consequences that we fear.
And those incidents included burglaries, where the burglar stole underwear and sex toys. There were incidents of voyeurism, a man being seen staring into windows, watching couples having sex. And there had been an incident where a man had approached two young women who were walking home and had masturbated at them in the street and ejaculated onto their front door.
In one study that looked at people who were caught for flashing, they found that about 1 in 4 escalated in the severity of their actions to what are called contact offenses, and that included rape and assault. The last sighting of Libby and the male figure was at the corner of Beverly Road and Haworth Street. 4 days after Libby went missing, police had a major breakthrough. Hidden behind some blue gates on Haworth Street, a camera captured a figure being put into the front seat of a car. Libby's mom and dad were asked by the police to view the footage.
They asked us if we thought it could be Libby, and I said, absolutely, that's Libby. I knew from the way that her hair moved. And I said, no, she doesn't get in the car like that. She doesn't get in a car that way. She gets in, she put her legs down and swing her legs in. She doesn't climb in a car like that. So I knew that she'd been put in the car. And that lodged in my brain. Someone has taken her. Someone's taken her.
A member of the public found on the street a watch, and it was Libby's watch. And that proved to be important evidence because it told us something about the circumstances in which she had gone into that car. It suggested a struggle.
The police attempted to track the vehicle which Libby was seen getting into. Just after midnight, the car was spotted at Oak Road playing fields.
Next to the playing fields, there's a dead end. We were fortunate to find some CCTV from residential property. And obviously it was very dark, but what you could see were headlights coming and going, and that captured this car arriving and then leaving. We then had some crucial evidence from a man who heard screams coming from a woman, and he was able to pinpoint the timing of those screams because he checked the time. That meant that the screams had to be related to Libby.
As the police continued to track the vehicle that Libby got into, they uncovered more disturbing footage of the driver.
This individual was masturbating in the street. And that was important evidence because it revealed that he obviously had an extremely high sex drive, insatiable, you might say.
The main reason people masturbate in public is because of the excitement of the thought of getting caught. Because otherwise you're not going to be in a public space, you're going to do it at home. And so this idea that somebody could catch you, that risk, that excitement is arousing. The bigger question is why you actually go through with it. The net was closing in on the male suspect. Then, a huge breakthrough. At 3 a.m. on February the 1st, he walked directly towards the camera.
We know that this is the same person because we've tracked the car.
Police discovered the vehicle belonged to a local man. The footage confirmed his identity. His name was Pavel Relevich, a 24-year-old Polish butcher who came to the UK in 2015. Married with 2 children, he lived less than a mile away from Libby's home. The police moved in to arrest Pavel for kidnap.
At that stage, we didn't know what had happened. We didn't know whether Libby was alive or dead. And so kidnap was the obvious charge to arrest him on.
I remember feeling sick, but I remember also thinking they'll arrest him and he'll tell us where she is and then we'll go and find her and I'll bring her home.
Police questioned Pavel about Libby's disappearance.
Are you responsible for kidnapping Libby Squire?
No.
At first, he denied having met Libby at all. But then he changed his story.
Hey man, stop, please. So, I need help. I need to go home, I need to go my mother.
He then ran the story that he was effectively acting as a good Samaritan. He was trying to get her back to her home address.
When they searched Pavel's vehicle, they uncovered some alarming items.
They found women's underwear, sex toys, and these were all the things that he had stolen in this series of burglaries when he was targeting student homes. And it was from that discovery that the police were able to suddenly establish that all of these precursor incidents had been the work of one person, and that person was Pavel Relevich.
Taking this underwear and keeping it in the trunk of your car, there's sort of an old language around this, which is that offenders sometimes like to take trophies from crime scenes. Typically for non-contact sexual offenses, like flashing, like masturbating in public, you don't typically have stuff with you. This is much more prepared. There's more going on here than just a spontaneous decision to flash somebody. But Pavel Relevich didn't just steal things.
In some of the incidents, Relevich had left either a condom or semen at the scene, and they were able to get a DNA sample. And in other cases, individuals were able to recognize him because he'd been seen peering into their windows.
The police confronted Pavel about the items found in the pink bag.
Why are those soiled knickers in your car?
What's funny?
Because
I am a normal guy and I don't do such things.
He was the perpetrator of several non-contact offences. The realisation of what had likely happened did sink in. And I had thought for quite some time that maybe he had assaulted her and she'd had a breakdown and maybe she'd gone somewhere.
48 days passed before the police got a breakthrough.
A pleasure fisherman saw what he believed to be a body in the water, but what they could also see is that around the neck of the body was a delicate gold necklace with the letter L. DNA samples were taken and examined, and it was confirmed to be the body of Libby Squire.
I handed the phone to Russell because I just couldn't speak. When he put the phone down, I said, "So does that mean she's dead?" And he said, "Yeah, it does." There was a big bit of me that was like, I was so happy that she'd been found, that she was coming home.
But it was almost impossible to determine how Libby had died.
When bodies are found in water, it's very, very difficult to tell whether they went in dead or alive. And that was the position here.
Libby's mom went to see her daughter's body.
It was a week after she'd been recovered. It was hard, but I was able to go in and sort of hold her hand and, you know, just sort of talk to her and say, "Thank you for coming back, and I'm really sorry I couldn't save you. I should have known that you were in danger and I should have saved you, but I didn't, and, you know, I'm sorry." But I just wanted to tell her, nobody can ever hurt you again. You're safe now.
Although Libby's body had been in the water for many, many weeks, a sample that was taken was found to contain the DNA of Pavel Relevich. It contained his semen.
And as far as I know, it's never been heard of in the world before. Nobody else has ever held on to DNA for 48 days in moving water. She's absolutely nailed him.
Pavel Relevich was rearrested.
You are under arrest for the murder and rape of Libby Squire.
When Relevich was arrested for murder, I mean, his reaction was quite incredible. He sort of giggled and laughed as if he found it funny. And he simply denied the offence.
At trial, the CCTV evidence was crucial.
It enabled the jury to follow Libby on her last journey, almost step by step. And it also then overlaid on Libby's journey the movements of Relevich.
It emerged that Pavel Relevich went to McDonald's and fueled up his car before driving to Haworth Street to wait for an unsuspecting victim.
And it was quite sinister, really, when you piece the CCTV together, because you had this idea of there was Libby in the centre of events, not knowing that circling around the outside of her was this man who was out looking to commit sexual offences, and then he spotted her. And you could see immediately that when he spotted her, the die was cast. She was a perfect victim for him. And so he was then immediately stalking her and working out how he could get her into his car.
Footage recovered from Oak Road also revealed he had gone back to the scene of the crime.
That return visit was absolutely dynamite in our hands. If he'd have just raped her, there is no way he would have gone back to the scene of the rape. because he would not have known whether the place would be swarming with police and he'd be walking into an arrest. It was the fact he had the confidence to go back that same night which demonstrated that he must have known he'd killed her.
Pavel Relevich was convicted of rape and murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years for the murder of Libby Squire.
He can get out, he can get married again, he can drive a car, he can go on holiday, he can eat roast beef, he can do whatever he wants. Libby can't, and that's not fair. He should never get out of prison.
Throughout the trial, Relevich never admitted that he had raped Libby or that he had killed her. He did not give any explanation for how she had died. He didn't give any explanation for how she'd come into the water. He maintained his account throughout that they'd had consensual sex. He'd left her fit and well. Sadly, in particular for Libby's family, the consequence of Relevich continuing to deny his offences is that we'll never know exactly what unfolded on Oak Road playing fields and precisely the sequence of events.
In the wake of Libby's death, her mother is determined to do something positive.
I knew I'd never be able to stop rape and murder, but she couldn't just die and nothing be done. The more I looked into the non-contact offences, I realised that actually one of the biggest problems we have is that women don't report.
Sexual offenses in general are underreported, so that includes rape, that includes various kinds of assault. But if we look at non-contact offenses, like in flashing or voyeurism, you have abysmal reporting rates. And so most of the time, people feel unable to report. They don't realize it's something they can report because it feels like this sort of hazy thing that happened to them. This combination of factors means that people who flash others, more often than not, will get away with it. And that's another reason why they often go on to perpetrate this crime multiple times. Together with Thames Valley Police, Lisa has launched a campaign called It Does Matter.
If your friend is drunk, never, ever send them home alone. Go home with them. And if you are a victim of a non-contact offence, report it. And if the police don't take you seriously, find another police officer and report it. Non-contact offenders will keep offending and eventually, they might go on to rape and murder. She will always be my firstborn. She'll always be my pie, my Libby pie, as I call her. She is still one of the six of us. We are a family of six. We always will be a family of six. People say to me, where do you find your strength? And she gives me the strength to carry on. She lives in my heart forever and ever. I think it's really important for people to remember her as Libby, not as Libby, the rape and murder victim, but as Libby, the friend, the girl, the daughter, the sister. And remember the good times with her, because they're way more important than how she died.
Pavel Relevich was able to perpetrate multiple sexually motivated crimes before he was finally held accountable. What you often find with all manner of sexual offenses is that once one person comes forward, other previous victims will also report the same offense or the same person. It's very sad that as a society we don't create enough space for women to feel this way in the first place, and that we sometimes need a very brave individual to come forward. But other times, you do have perpetrators held accountable for various crimes that they've committed, and yet they're able to go on to commit heinous crimes. And in our next case, the actions of a violent offender with numerous convictions proved fatal. In the U.S., Colorado, 50 miles northeast of Denver, the city of Greeley. A vibrant community with a lively music scene.
Greeley is about an hour north of Denver, about an hour south of the Wyoming border. It has a little over 100,000 people in it, partly rural, partly urban, a little bit of a unique mix.
It was home to 53-year-old Scott Sessions, affectionately called Scotty by his father, Stanley.
Scotty was just a going guy. He just very animated all the time, just such a fun personality to be around. He was quite an achiever, and when he was old enough, he started to play the trumpet. It was fun to watch him.
Scott and his brother were adopted.
Your parental instincts kick in no matter where the kids come from. He particularly loved his mom. He just had a knack for making people feel good.
Scott graduated from Brigham Young University with a degree in music and performed with a number of bands.
He told me many times, this is the only time I am truly happy, really, really happy is when I'm on the stage.
But Scott's musical talent couldn't pay all the bills.
He painted houses. He was really good at it.
Scott continued to play on the music scene, but life wasn't always easy.
It was tough times because he got to experimenting with the drugs. He got on this track and wronged people around him, and he had a tough time for a few years.
In early 2020, Scott and his jazz band entered a music competition in Memphis, Tennessee. Scott had become well known and respected within the music community.
Northern Colorado's best trumpet player, Mr. Scott Sessions.
He was ready to take the next step in the big time. He was ready to perform on the big stage.
On Saturday, February 8th, 2020, Stanley spoke with his son, Scott, on the phone.
His mom was in a care facility at that time. And I said, yeah, I'm going to go down and see her tomorrow. And he said, well, I want to go with you. And he says, I'll see you later. That was it.
But on Sunday, Scott failed to turn up to visit his mom. And his bandmates started to worry when he didn't show up for a gig. Monday, February 10th, 70 miles northwest of Greeley in Larimer County, 911 dispatchers received an alarming call.
I'm on the Pingree Park Road, and I have a dead body.
Are you able to provide any details?
Well, there was a tree on fire, and I went up to put it out, and he's laying next to it. Yeah, he's definitely passed away.
Police arrived and began investigating the scene.
The body was wrapped up in a blanket. The initial indication was that it was a homicide and the body had been dumped there.
Police in Larimer County performed an autopsy on the burnt body found in the mountains. It revealed a brutal murder.
The autopsy revealed a laceration to the neck from front to back, cutting all the way to the vertebrae. The depth of the cut to the neck was significant and violent, a laceration that nearly decapitated him. The burning was determined to be post-mortem.
A fingerprint scanner identified the victim as Scott Sessions.
I got a call from the police department. He said, we found your son. He's deceased. I knew that I had to go tell his mother. Immediately, that was my thought. The next morning I did go, and she said, who would want to hurt my Scotty?
Police needed to find the killer. They searched Scott's house and found some messages on his computer to a woman named Heather Frank.
The messages between Heather and Scott indicated that they were starting a new relationship and that there was some romantic interest between the two of them.
48-year-old Heather Frank was a manager at a diner in Loveland. She had 3 grown-up children.
Heather was vivacious. She was extremely creative. She liked crafts, she liked arts, she liked music. She loved going out to listen to bands. People who knew Heather said she was the kind of person who lit up a room. She had the most infectious laugh, and she had a spirit about her that people noticed. And when she grew up, that traveled with her.
One of Heather's last messages to Scott was an invitation to come over to her apartment late on Saturday, February 8th. Detectives checked Heather and Scott's phone records. The data confirmed they'd both been at Heather's apartment on Saturday, February 8th, the night Scott disappeared. Police checked the area around Heather's apartment for surveillance footage, and by Wednesday, February 12th, they got a major breakthrough. They found Scott's car in the parking lot of a grocery store.
The keys were still inside the car, the doors were unlocked. The floor mat from the driver's side had been placed just outside the driver's side door in the snow. Once they found the car, they started pulling surveillance videos from nearby to see if they could determine how it got there and when.
Police uncovered a crucial piece of footage which showed Scott's car being driven into the parking lot.
The direction that it comes in from is important because Heather Frank's apartment is a short distance away, and this video was taken on February 11th, which was the day after Scott Sessions' body was found in the mountains.
A male figure was seen getting out of Scott's vehicle.
He walks back around the back side of the car over to the passenger side. We see him putting something on the ground, shuffling his feet almost as if they were trying to wipe away footprints in the snow, and then walking away from the car.
Investigators continued searching for more surveillance footage to see where the man went. At the same time, they were also looking for the last known person to see Scott, Heather Frank.
They started digging into her background a little bit more, and what they found was that she had been the victim of some acts of domestic violence at the hands of a former boyfriend by the name of Kevin Eastman.
48-year-old Kevin Eastman was already known to the police.
Kevin Eastman has an extensive criminal history. His crimes go back years. Among the many offenses he's been charged for were domestic violence multiple times, vehicle offenses, burglary, weapons offenses.
In 2015, he violently attacked Heather and pleaded guilty to assault in the 3rd degree. He was sentenced to 2 years probation. 4 years later, after another altercation with Kevin Eastman, Heather had to receive treatment in the hospital.
Allegedly, Eastman punched Heather multiple times in the ribs, leaving her with serious injuries. This attack was so savage, it left Heather fearing for her life, and she pleaded with police for protection.
Investigators obtained Kevin Eastman's phone records. They revealed he'd also been at Heather's apartment on Saturday, February 8th, the night Scott went missing.
All 3 phones, that of Scott Sessions, Heather Frank, and Kevin Eastman, had converged at the same time on Saturday night at Heather Frank's apartment. At that point, Scott Sessions' phone dies or is turned off and never moves again. But the next morning, Heather Frank and Kevin Eastman's phone leave the area of Heather Frank's apartment and begin traveling up the Poudre Canyon towards Pingree Park, which is where Scott Sessions' body is ultimately found. Now you have Kevin Eastman and Heather Frank as the primary suspects in the disappearance and death of Scott Sessions.
Investigators tracked Kevin and Heather's cell phones and began to look for footage in the same locations.
One of the key videos that they find is a video from Poudre Canyon on the way to Pingree Park. It's 8:37 in the morning. Can't see the license plate number, but you can see some damage on that passenger side front fender that we later find to be consistent with Kevin Eastman's vehicle.
Just over 3 hours later, at 11:46 a.m., the police identified a similar vehicle driving back along the same road.
The timing works here because it's about an hour drive to the area where Scott Sessions' body was disposed of.
As the evidence slowly built up a map of their movements, police decided to put both Kevin Eastman and Heather Frank under surveillance. They attached a camera to a lamppost directly opposite Heather Frank's apartment and put GPS trackers on both Kevin and Heather's vehicles. Heather kept to her normal routine as if nothing had happened.
In the days after Scott Sessions was murdered, according to police, Heather appeared to go about life as normal. She went to work, she went shopping, she went out to dinner. But later, when investigators talked to the people she worked with, they said they knew something wasn't right. Something simply seemed off with Heather.
The fact that she's going to work and she isn't reporting the crime immediately suggests that he's threatened her with something, or he's threatened that if maybe he gets caught, he'll figure out another way to kill her. And this is exacerbated by the fact that he has made these kinds of threats before. It's reasonable for the police at this point to say maybe she was in on it, because why else wouldn't she report it? What has she got to gain from not reporting? But it's also equally likely that she's going to work because he's saying you need to act normal, otherwise there will be consequences. On Saturday, February 15th at 5:15 p.m., Kevin and Heather were seen leaving her apartment together.
At this point, the police have arrest warrants for both Heather and Kevin. We see Kevin Eastman coming out of that apartment, walking towards his Subaru. They're watching their movements to formulate a plan as to when they're going to effectuate that arrest. Looks like Heather is a little unsteady on her feet, whether she's injured or intoxicated, we don't know. But something seems a little off here. She's holding some coats. Kevin also appears to have some clothing. Whether or not they're headed out for a longer trip, we don't know. They get in the car. They're about to drive off here.
The vehicle was tracked driving to a ranch 15 minutes outside of Greeley. The following morning, Kevin Eastman was observed by police acting suspiciously.
Kevin Eastman is near a fire pit, and that he is starting to burn some material of some kind. After watching Kevin Eastman do that for a while, he sees Kevin Eastman get into his car and leave the ranch and begins driving toward town. Kevin Eastman proceeds to drive to a gas station. He parks at one of the pumps, gets out of the car, but then takes a red plastic gas can out of the back of his car and begins filling it up. The detective's concerned that Eastman's getting more gas to take back to the burn pile to destroy additional evidence.
The lone police officer made the decision to arrest Kevin Eastman.
When Eastman was arrested, they found 2 spent shell casings and 3 live rounds, as well as a large hunting knife.
Kevin Eastman was questioned by police.
Sir, how are you? I'm fine, sir. How are you? Your name? Kevin Eastman.
Kevin Eastman starts off by talking about his relationship with Heather.
She broke my heart really bad right before Christmas. She just gave me a call and she said, "Hey, I don't ever want to see you or hear you again out of the blue." And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And Alexis totally destroyed me. I went off my medication and I just gave up my will to live.
When the interview turned to Scott Sessions, Kevin gave away a crucial piece of information.
Heather hooked up with this guy named Scott. I feel bad speaking ill of the dead, and I feel bad breaking her confidence. You said that you didn't want to speak ill of the dead. I told you that he was a missing person.
People do often slip up a bit in interviews, especially if they haven't really rehearsed their story. That's a big slip up to say that this person is dead. And yeah, it could happen if you assume that missing persons after a certain time are going to be dead, but it does very much point to he has guilty knowledge. He knows something more than he's willing to accept at this point.
Kevin begins to change his tune a little bit. He begins providing police with bits and pieces of evidence indicating that he was either there at the time Scott Sessions was killed or that he came immediately after.
I went over to the house because I know that she gets too drunk. Where was Scott hurt? In someplace pretty serious, looked like.
And police asked Kevin where Heather was.
Where's Heather? What? Where's Heather? She's probably at work. She's not at work. She's not home, and her car's home.
While Kevin Eastman was being interviewed, detectives conducted a search at the ranch property where Kevin had been seen burning things.
One of the officers who's conducting the search leaves the area of the burn pit and lifts up a wooden tabletop that is nearby and discovers another body. The body that is found underneath the tabletop is wrapped in plastic and baling wire.
The body was confirmed to be Heather Frank.
Heather died from 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. They were 2 .22 caliber bullets.
In the interview room, police confronted Kevin with this new information.
We found Heather. And Heather is in the same condition that Scott is. Heather is dead.
People do break down and cry in interviews, but in this case, it's such a quick turn and such a dramatic sobbing. I haven't seen this before. I guess if you're worried that this could have happened and it's your worst nightmare and then they confirm it and you've already been thinking it, maybe you could quickly escalate like this. But if it is coming out of the blue, it seems difficult, or certainly unusual, to see someone breaking down like this.
Detectives do get him to start talking about what he sees at Heather Frank's apartment. And what he describes is seeing a lot of blood.
What one were you in when you saw Scott's body? Was it a big mess? It's where? It's where? It was everywhere. 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 Everywhere.
So you see a lot of blood.
Was the blood there when you first got there, or was the blood there after you'd been there for a while? Right on the rifle, I see it. You just went out of control after that.
I guess it's something we don't really think about, that someone who has been the perpetrator in a crime is surprised, perhaps even, by the extent of the crime scene that they've created. We know that people can have flashbacks, for example, to both the act itself and the consequences of the act. And just because you are the reason that there was blood at the scene, it doesn't mean that you can't still have flashbacks and intrusive thoughts.
It's where? It's where?
Officers obtained a search warrant for Heather Frank's apartment.
They found some things that weren't adding up. Her cell phone and purse were left at the apartment. There were also some spots of blood on a couch near the entryway.
But the biggest discovery was by the front door.
When they pulled back a large black rubber mat near the entryway, they discovered a large pool of blood.
The blood was later determined to belong to Scott Sessions.
The location of the large pool of blood suggests that Scott Sessions never made it more than a couple steps inside the front door. I always believed that the killer was waiting behind the door as soon as Scott Sessions stepped into the entryway, that he was attacked from behind and his throat was cut at that time. Now police are discovering that Kevin Eastman is leaving a trail of dead bodies. He had been at the scene of Scott Sessions' death. He had been at the location where Scott Sessions' body was placed. And now he was the last person to be seen alive with Heather Frank.
Can I get a lawyer? Sorry, guys. Thank you. I'm sorry I let you down. My life's over no matter what.
As the police wrap up the interview, they have enough evidence at that point to charge him not only with the death of Scott Sessions, but with Heather Frank as well.
Kevin, since you're under arrest, we are going to change you out into jail clothing.
Heather was present for Scott's death by Kevin Eastman, but I don't have any indication that she instigated that, wanted it, was involved in it. She was trapped and was a victim of his violence. I think every indication is that she was under the thumb or control of Kevin Eastman and was just too scared to do anything about it.
In the days after Heather's death, there was a great deal of sadness in the community, but also anger, especially among her family and friends. She was caught in Kevin Eastman's violent control, and it seemed to many people that if things had been done differently, she might still be with us.
As well as the video surveillance footage, DNA evidence proved vital.
There were a pair of jeans found in amongst Kevin Eastman's property in the garage. Those jeans were ultimately tested and determined to have Scott Sessions' DNA or blood on them, linking Kevin Eastman scientifically to Scott Sessions' death.
In court, the jury found Kevin Eastman guilty of the murder of both Scott Sessions and Heather Frank. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, as well as an additional 27 years.
I have never been one to let other people affect my happiness. In fact, I will not allow you, Mr. Perp, you to affect how I live the rest of my life. I'm going to forgive you because I don't want to carry this burden. This is your burden to carry alone. A few days after the trial, we held a memorial for Scott. It was truly a memorial, not a funeral. A lot of people came forward and told me what a great guy he was. They told me incidences of kindness. They told me they'll miss him. I was very grateful for that.